Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in June, which I felt like was overall a pretty good reading month. I didn't read as many books quantity-wise as I had hoped. I ended up playing a lot of Inquisition and Great Ace Attorney, which was a lot of fun, so I don't regret it. But I did a lot of that. I was also doing a lot of job applications, and I just didn't read as many books as I intended. That said, I feel like it was a pretty good reading month in terms of quality because everything was 3 stars and up, and I had a good time with everything that I read. Even that 3-star, I felt like I still enjoyed it, and that's still like a good rating. So overall, it was, I think, a good reading month, even if it wasn't as many books as I had originally planned to read. Diving into the first book that I read, I'm so excited this is the first one because this was my favorite book I read as well. I'm very excited to talk about it. This is The Blighted Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe, which is the beginning of the Devoured Worlds trilogy. This is following Nyra and Tarquin, who are on opposite sides of a conflict. Tarquin is one of the heirs to a kind of galactic business empire family, and he is a geologist. His family is involved in mining for a resource called relkatite that is used to build space stations and warp cores for spaceships, and it also is used for printing technology, where in this book people can back up their neural maps and be reprinted into new bodies when they die. This makes them kind of functionally immortal if they have access to pay for those reprints. However, there is that pay aspect. There's, capitalism is a hellscape. So there is that piece. But there's also the risk that if you die a really violent death, your map might crack. You basically become unprintable because there's like an emotional bleed over between the moment of your death and your neural map that is left. And you just like wake up screaming every time, so you can't be reprinted again. So there is that risk. People are kind of functionally immortal, but there isn't like a complete assurance that they'll be able to keep being reprinted over time. So Tarquin's family is responsible for that technology, and Nyra was previously a bodyguard for Tarquin's family, but she found out something about their mining process that makes her think that it's responsible for this ecosystem collapse that's been happening on a bunch of the different planets that they have mined. So she has been kind of locked away, but she escapes and is on a trip with Tarquin and a bunch of other people. Tarquin doesn't know that she's there, and they are going to they're going to a planet that is the next, place that the family is going to be mining for relkatite. But when they get there, they end up having a bit of a situation that results in the ship crash landing on the planet, and Tarquin and Nyra are amongst a group of survivors, and they discover that the planet is already dead. So now they need to figure out how to get off the planet and see if they can figure out what's actually happened here, if the ecosystem collapse is tied to the Mercator family in some way, or if it's completely separate, and they need to kind of figure out both mysteries at the same time because there's the risk that they will run out of food and water and all of those things. So I thought this was really good. I loved this. I think I ended up giving it 4.5 stars because it was one conversation that I wanted to dig into a little bit more, but 4.5 rounded up to 5 for my enjoyment levels because I loved every minute of this book. I think that Tarquin and Nyra are both super fascinating characters. They're very different personalities, but I liked the way that they were able to work together and the way that their relationship evolves. There is a romance between them, and it very much starts out as this kind of mutual distrust. They don't really know each other, and they're not really sure what the other person's motives are, what kind of person they are in general. And it grows throughout the situation as they're working together to survive to this kind of mutual respect, and then ultimately to friendship, to romance in a way that I thought was really believable, and I thought I really liked that journey for them. It was just this really sweet romance. They're both very snarky, and they kind of bond over being snarky to each other, and it's just really fun. And it was a bright spot for them in the midst of this kind of horrible situation that's happening. So I really liked that. I also really liked the supporting cast. I think that they're really interesting, and we get a lot of very different kinds of personalities and the kind of bonding but also conflict that comes out of that, especially in a stressful situation like this. So I felt like the characters were fantastic. I really liked the way that the mystery played out around this ecosystem collapse as they were investigating and trying to figure out why was this planet already dead when it was supposed to be an abundant source of life and a place where they could come and mine relkatite. So there's that mystery. I felt was just really well handled and satisfying to read. You kind of are kept guessing throughout the book, and there's lots of twists in it. And I really thought that that was fun. And I liked that the survival made it feel like there were real stakes for these characters as well, even though, technically functionally immortal, there is that risk that they'll crack if something goes horribly wrong on this planet. And also just like the stress of the situation, I felt like was communicated really well. I think this also sets up some really exciting things for the rest of the series. There's a lot of like big politics happening, things that Tarquin is only just becoming aware of and that Naira is kind of helping him to get to grips with throughout the story. And I'm really excited to dive into book 2 of this. I'm so excited to see like where all of those politics are going to go. And yeah, it's just really fun, and I just could not put this book down while I was reading it. After the Blighted Stars, I worked on a vlog for some arcs that I had that were both June releases, so I will link that up in the cards in the description down below so you can check it out if you'd like. So since I've already done kind of full reviews of those there, I'm just going to go over them briefly here. But the first book I read for that was The God and the Gumiho by Sophie Kim, which I gave 4 stars. This is an urban fantasy romance kind of a thing with a murder mystery in it. We're following Sokka the Fallen, who is a trickster god who's been kicked out of heaven and is trying to regain his godhood, and Hani, who is the notorious Scarlet Fox, but nobody knows this. She is responsible for a massive serial killing spree that happened about 100 years ago, and also responsible for a lot of the laws that constrain Gumiho behavior now. And Sokka is tasked with killing both the Scarlet Fox and a demon to regain his godhood, and they end up working together because she's trying to throw him off the trail. So that's the setup for that. I thought this was really fun, and it was just like a cheerful book, but it has a really angsty ending that I thought was entertaining. I had a really good time reading it. I do think that the epilogue wasn't necessary. I would have been fine if the epilogue was not there. But overall, this was a lot of fun. I was like giggling and smiling the whole time I was reading it. My only issues come with the timeline. We're given a countdown that doesn't really matter, and some internal inconsistencies with the characters where they're behaving kind of differently at the end in a way that was, I don't think, consistent with like the arcs that they had been on. So there's just some like inconsistencies with their behavior that I didn't think were completely believable or in line with the person that we'd been told that they were. And it didn't like make sense with the arc that they had gone on across like the, you know, character growth that they had experienced. So overall, still really liked this, would recommend it. I thought it was a very fun fantasy romance. The other book I read for that video was Foul Days by Genevieve Damova, which is a story about Kasara, who's a witch, and she trades her shadow, which is the source of her powers, to escape Chernograd, which is her home city, to go to the sister city of Belgrade. The difference between them is that Chernograd is surrounded by a horrible tentacle wall that keeps all of the people and monsters in. So Chernograd is full of monsters. There's monsters there year-round, but during the first 12 days of the year, the city is basically overrun with monsters during what's called the Foul Days, when the year is considered like unbaptized, and a bunch of monsters that aren't normally present can enter the city. Other monsters are more active, and the Czar of Monsters is able to enter the city only during this period as well. So Kasara is the ex of the Czar of Monsters, and she wants to escape him, gets to Belgrade, immediately regrets her decision, and tries to get back. So now she needs to find her shadow so that she can get back to Chernograd and resume her duties as a witch, which include protecting the people of Chernograd from monsters. But the smuggler has been murdered. So she gets involved in a murder mystery trying to find her shadow, and at the same time develops a very fast-acting version of the wasting sickness that afflicts witches who have lost their shadow. So she's really working against a time crunch to try and find her shadow and get back home, and she ends up teaming up with Detective Bakarov to find her shadow. He's investigating a smuggling ring that also has ties to the person who took her shadow. So there's just kind of a lot of pieces going on here. There's lots of monster hunting, lots of mystery. The mystery is fairly obvious. We have a very small cast of characters, so it's pretty clear who has to be the traitor in there. And then we also have a romance between Kasara and Bakarov that I just don't think works. I do plan on reading book 2. It's a duology, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish it out. I do want to know how the story ends because we have some interesting loose threads at the very end of the story, and I'm excited to see how that's going to get dealt with. I'm really hoping that book 2 will deal with some of my issues with like the romance and some of the plot stuff. So fingers crossed. I am looking forward to it. I just did not like this as much as I thought I was going to. The last book I read in June is the only book off my original TBR that I managed to fit in. I had great intentions and really poor follow-through on that, but I did manage to read All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby, which I ended up giving 4 stars. I did really enjoy this. I have a couple of minor issues that made it not a 5-star for me, but they are pretty small, and I still really enjoyed this and would read more from S.A. Cosby in the future. This one is following Titus Crown, who's the first black sheriff in a small rural county in Virginia, and a year to the day after he's elected, a former student walks into the local high school, kills a teacher, and then comes outside and is shot by police. So Titus is having to deal with the kind of ramifications of that, the investigation into the police shooting to see if there was anything else they could have done, and also very quickly discovers that both people involved in the shooting were also involved in a series of serial killings. It feels redundant to say series of serial killings, but I don't know how else to phrase that. And that there is a, as of yet, unidentified serial killer still at large in his county. So he is trying to investigate that. All the while, there are these other political tensions happening for him. There is a white nationalist group that wants to hold a parade during the local fall fest. There's also a lot of pressure on Titus from people who got him elected, who have very high expectations of his behavior and very high expectations of his ability to change the sheriff's office from the inside. There's also the people who didn't want him to get elected, who have been pushing him to act more in line with like the previous sheriffs and do the things that they want him to do. So there's just like a lot of pressure on Titus, and he's having to deal with many different things all at once that are very difficult. And it's, I would say, less about the mystery of the serial killer and more about how Titus is handling all of these different pressures and the ways that the various revelations, the new pieces of information that come to light, impact him, but also impact the community. How does the community handle learning these things about the people who were involved in that shooting? How does it handle learning about, this beloved teacher who turns out to have not been the person that they thought he was? So I think it's very much more about, like, the community and Titus himself than it is about, like, the mystery. But I do think the mystery is satisfying and it unravels in a really fun way. It's very gritty, it's very dark. The stuff that they're investigating is really gruesome. I will say, content warning, if you go into this, know that there is a lot of abuse and sexual assault and murder of children in this, so just be aware of that. It is very heavy. There's also obviously content warnings for racism and kind of, white nationalist propaganda that is being spouted by some of the people in this. Not that, like, S.A. Cosby is saying that, but, like, there are characters in here who are white nationalists, so there's a lot of kind of that to deal with as well. So, very interesting story. I really enjoyed Titus as a protagonist. I think he's fascinating, and the way that he's dealing with all of this is interesting. The way that he's thinking about his role as sheriff and the things that he has to do to try and protect the community that he loves and the people that he cares about, but also his responsibility to care about the people that he doesn't care about, the people who are kind of awful to him. And I think the way that he's navigating that is just really interesting. He's somebody who, like, really craves control because he feels like there are so many things that are out of his control, and I just enjoyed him as a protagonist a lot. I liked the ways that he was thinking about things, and I really like the ending of this. I feel like it's a satisfying conclusion. I think that Titus is in an interesting place at the end, and overall, I just really enjoyed this. I thought it had so many interesting conversations, and I'm definitely excited to pick up more from S.A. Cosby in future. So these and some ebooks are all of the books that I read in June. I feel like it was a pretty good reading month, even though I had a few issues with some of the stuff that I read, but, like, overall, really good quality, and I'm excited to pick up more, particularly from these two authors. I'm very excited about that. So anyway, let me know down in the comments what your favorite thing you read in June was. I would love to hear about it. I'm always looking for more recommendations, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.